Sometimes a stranger walks into your life for just one night and changes everything forever. Jake had been living the same life for way too long. Every morning at 7 a.m. the alarm would buzz. Coffee, shower, work clothes, and out the door by 8:15. His job at the marketing firm paid well enough, but it felt like he was just going through the motions day after day. At 29, Jake thought he'd have figured things out by now. His friends were getting married, buying houses, and starting families. Meanwhile, he was stuck in what felt like an endless loop of work, gym, takeout dinner, and Netflix until he fell asleep on the couch. That Thursday started exactly like every other Thursday. The weather was gloomy, matching his mood perfectly. Gray clouds hung low over the city, threatening rain but never quite delivering. Jake finished his work around 6 p.m., feeling mentally drained from another day of creating ads for products he didn't care about. He grabbed his jacket and walked out of the office building, watching people hurry past on the sidewalk. Everyone seemed to have somewhere important to go. Jake just felt lost. His usual routine would be to head straight home, order pizza, and zone out in front of the TV. But something made him stop that evening. Maybe it was the gray sky or the empty feeling in his chest. He decided to break his pattern, just a little bit. There was a small coffee shop 2 blocks from his office that he'd walked past hundreds of times but never entered. The warm yellow light spilling through its windows looked inviting. Jake pushed open the glass door and stepped inside. The place was cozy in a way that made you want to stay longer than planned. Soft jazz music played in the background, not too loud, just enough to fill the comfortable silence. The smell of fresh coffee and baked goods wrapped around him like a warm blanket. Only a few people sat scattered around the small space. An older man with glasses read a newspaper in the corner. A young woman typed furiously on her laptop near the window. The barista, a friendly guy with a beard, smiled and nodded as Jake approached the counter. Jake ordered a simple black coffee and a sandwich. Nothing fancy, just something to fill the empty space in his stomach and maybe in his evening. He found a small table near the back, away from the window but with a good view of the entire cafe. He pulled out his phone, as he always did when eating alone. Work emails, social media, news articles he'd never finish reading. The same digital routine that filled so many of his quiet moments. But tonight even his phone felt boring. Jake found himself just sitting there, coffee growing cold in his hands, watching the world move around him. The older man folded his newspaper and left, nodding goodbye to the barista. The young woman finally stopped typing and stretched her arms above her head. For the first time in months, Jake wasn't in a hurry to be somewhere else. The cafe felt like a pause in his otherwise scheduled life. He could sit here as long as he wanted. No meetings, no deadlines, no one expecting him to be productive. He started thinking about how long it had been since he'd done something just because he wanted to. Not because he had to, or because it was part of his routine, but simply because it seemed nice. When was the last time he'd felt excited about anything? In high school, Jake had dreamed of becoming a travel writer. He'd imagined visiting far-off places, meeting interesting people, and sharing their stories with the world. But somewhere along the way, practical concerns took over. Bills needed to be paid, careers needed to be built, and dreams became hobbies that eventually got forgotten. Now, sitting in this quiet cafe, those old dreams felt very far away. Jake wondered if he'd ever find his way back to that version of himself who believed in possibilities. The rain that had been threatening all day finally started to fall. Light drops at first, then steady streams running down the cafe windows. Jake watched people hurry past outside, holding newspapers over their heads or ducking under store awnings. He should probably head home soon. His apartment, his routine, his comfortable but unfulfilling evening schedule waited for him. But something about the rain and the warm cafe made him want to stay just a little longer. The barista came by to refill his coffee without being asked. "Rough day?" he asked with genuine concern. "Not rough exactly," Jake replied. "Just same as always, I guess." The barista nodded knowingly. "I get that. Sometimes the hardest days are the ones that feel like every other day." Those words hit Jake harder than expected. Yes, that was exactly it. It wasn't that his life was terrible. It was that it had become predictable in a way that made him feel invisible, even to himself. After the barista walked away, Jake stared out at the rain and wondered when he'd stopped taking chances. When had safe become more important than interesting? When had he decided that a comfortable routine was better than an uncertain adventure? He didn't have answers to these questions, but asking them felt like the first honest thing he'd done with himself in months. The cafe began to empty as evening settled over the city. Soon it would just be him, the barista, and the quiet hum of the espresso machine. Jake checked his phone, 7:30 p.m. Later than he usually ate dinner, but he wasn't hungry yet. For once, he had nowhere urgent to be. The thought was both liberating and slightly scary. Without his routine to guide him, Jake wasn't sure what to do with himself. He decided to order another coffee and maybe something sweet. As he walked back to the counter, Jake felt something shift inside him. Nothing dramatic, just a small recognition that this evening was already different from all the others. He didn't know it yet, but this small decision to sit in a cafe instead of rushing home would change everything. Sometimes the most important moments start with the tiniest breaks from routine. The barista smiled as Jake approached. "Sticking around for a while?" "Yeah," Jake said, surprising himself. "I think I am." Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the city clean. Inside the warm cafe, Jake settled back into his seat and waited for whatever came next. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't planning ahead. He was just present in this moment, in this place. He had no idea that in just a few minutes his ordinary evening would become anything but ordinary. Jake was just settling back into his seat with his second coffee when the cafe door opened with a soft chime. He glanced up casually, expecting to see another regular customer seeking shelter from the rain. What he saw instead made him forget about his coffee completely. She stepped inside like she belonged there, even though Jake was certain he'd never seen her before. There was something about the way she moved that caught his attention immediately. Not rushed or apologetic about the weather, just confident and purposeful. Her hair was a striking auburn color that seemed to catch every bit of light in the cozy cafe. She wasn't tall, but she carried herself in a way that made her presence fill the room. Jake found himself watching as she paused just inside the doorway, taking in the space with intelligent eyes. The rain had clearly caught her off guard. Her jacket was soaked through, and small droplets of water clung to her hair. But instead of looking frustrated or uncomfortable, she seemed almost amused by the situation. That's when something unexpected happened. Without any hesitation or self-consciousness, she began removing her wet jacket. Then just as naturally, she pulled off the cardigan underneath it. Jake watched, transfixed as she handled the situation with complete ease and confidence. She wasn't doing anything inappropriate. Under the cardigan, she wore a simple black dress that was perfectly modest. But there was something about her complete lack of awkwardness that was mesmerizing. Most people would have hurried to the bathroom or apologized profusely for dripping water everywhere. Not her. She simply hung her wet clothes over the back of an empty chair near the entrance, shook out her hair with her fingers and smoothed down her dress. The whole thing took maybe 30 seconds, but Jake felt like he'd witnessed something remarkable. It wasn't what she did that impressed him. It was how she did it, with complete authenticity and zero embarrassment, like someone who was perfectly comfortable in her own skin. The few other customers in the cafe had noticed too, but she didn't seem bothered by the attention. She walked to the counter with the same confident stride she'd used when entering. Jake realized he was staring and quickly looked down at his coffee, but curiosity got the better of him, and his eyes drifted back up to watch her order. She spoke to the barista with warmth and genuine interest, asking about the different coffee options like she actually cared about his recommendations. When he suggested their house blend, she smiled and said, "Perfect. I trust your judgment." There was something refreshing about someone who could make quick decisions without overthinking everything. Jake usually spent 5 minutes studying menus, even at places he'd been to dozens of times. While waiting for her order, she turned slightly and caught Jake looking at her. Instead of the awkward moment he expected, she simply smiled. Not embarrassed, not annoyed, just genuinely friendly. "Quite a downpour out there," she said, addressing him directly. Her voice had a warm quality that made even small talk sound interesting. Jake nodded, feeling suddenly tongue-tied. "Yeah, it came out of nowhere. The best storms usually do," she replied, and something about the way she said it made Jake think she wasn't just talking about the weather. The barista called out that her coffee was ready. She thanked him with genuine appreciation, and then did something that surprised Jake even more. Instead of finding a table far away or burying herself in her phone, She looked around the nearly empty cafe and then back at him. Mind if I sit here? Everywhere else seems a bit too quiet for my taste. Jake's table was in the middle of the room, not particularly private or special in any way, but he quickly moved his phone and notebook to make space. Of course, please, he said, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. She settled in across from him with easy grace, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup to warm them. Up close, Jake could see that her eyes were a striking green color, and they held a kind of intelligence that made him want to sit up straighter. I'm Sophia, she said, extending her hand for a proper introduction. Jake, he replied, shaking her hand. Her grip was firm and confident, just like everything else about her. So Jake, what brings you to this cozy little place on a rainy Thursday evening? It was a simple question, but something about her genuine interest made Jake want to give a real answer instead of the usual polite small talk. Honestly, I was trying to break my routine, he said. I walk past this place every day but never come in. Tonight just felt different. Sophia nodded like this made perfect sense. Sometimes we need to surprise ourselves. Routines can be comfortable, but they can also become cages if we're not careful. The way she said it wasn't preachy or judgmental. It was more like she was sharing a discovery she'd made about life. What about you? Jake asked. Are you from around here? Just passing through, Sophia said. I'm a photographer and I travel quite a bit for work. I was actually supposed to catch a train an hour ago, but I saw this place and decided the next train could wait. Jake was amazed. She'd completely changed her travel plans just because a coffee shop looked inviting. The spontaneity of it was both inspiring and slightly terrifying to someone who planned his meals 3 days in advance. What kind of photography do you do? Sophia's eyes lit up. Mostly documentary work. I love capturing real moments, authentic emotions. The kind of stuff that happens when people think nobody's watching. She pulled out her phone and showed him a few photos. They weren't posed or perfect, but they were incredibly powerful. A child laughing in the rain. An elderly couple sharing a quiet moment on a park bench. A street musician completely lost in his performance. These are incredible, Jake said, and he meant it. You have a real gift for seeing beauty in ordinary moments. Thank you. That means a lot. Sophia put her phone away and looked directly at him. I think ordinary moments are often the most extraordinary ones. We just forget to notice them. As she spoke, Jake realized he was having his first genuine conversation in months. Not work talk, not weather small talk, but real communication with someone who seemed to actually think about life. The rain continued to drum against the windows, creating a cozy cocoon around their table. Other customers had come and gone, but Jake and Sophia remained, talking like old friends who had just rediscovered each other. You know, Sophia said, glancing at her still damp clothes. Getting caught in that storm might have been the best thing that happened to me today. Jake followed her gaze to the window, where rain was still streaking down the glass. Sometimes the unexpected detours turn out to be exactly where we needed to go. Sophia smiled at that, a warm, genuine expression that made Jake feel like he'd said something worthwhile. Neither of them realized it yet, but this chance meeting in a small cafe was about to change both of their lives in ways they couldn't imagine. What started as polite conversation quickly turned into something much deeper. Sophia had a way of asking questions that made Jake think about things he'd forgotten he cared about. So you work in marketing, she said, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. Do you enjoy it? Most people would have said yes automatically, given the expected polite response. But something about Sophia's genuine curiosity made Jake pause and consider the question honestly. I'm good at it, he said finally, but I'm not sure that's the same thing as enjoying it. Sophia nodded like she understood completely. I used to work in an office too. Corporate communications. I was climbing the ladder, making good money, doing everything I was supposed to do, but I felt like I was disappearing a little bit every day. Jake leaned forward, interested. What changed? I realized I was living someone else's version of success, she said. I was so busy being what I thought I should be that I forgot who I actually was. Her words hit Jake like a gentle slap. That feeling of disappearing, of going through the motions without really being present in his own life. She had put into words exactly what he'd been experiencing. How did you figure out what you actually wanted? He asked. Sophia smiled, but there was something wistful in her expression. It wasn't some big revelation. I was sitting in a meeting one day, listening to people discuss quarterly projections, and I suddenly thought about this photo I'd taken the weekend before. just a random shot of kids playing in a fountain. But looking at their joy, their complete presence in that moment, I realized that's what I wanted to capture. Real life, real emotions. So you just quit? Not immediately. I was terrified, she admitted. Leaving a steady job to chase something uncertain. Everyone thought I was having some kind of breakdown. But I started taking photography classes at night, building a portfolio on weekends. Eventually, the fear of staying the same became stronger than the fear of change. Jake found himself hanging on every word. He'd never met anyone who had actually made such a dramatic life change. It seemed both inspiring and impossible. Don't you miss the security? He asked. Sometimes, Sophia said honestly. There are definitely moments when I'm eating ramen for the third day in a row and wondering if I made a huge mistake. But then I'll capture something amazing, or meet someone with an incredible story and I remember why I chose this path. She pulled out her phone again and showed him more of her work. There was a series of photos from a small town in Montana, where she'd documented the last family-owned bookstore before it closed down. The images told a complete story. The elderly owner's pride, the community's sadness, the bittersweet beauty of endings. These are incredible, Jake said. You're not just taking pictures. You're preserving moments that matter. That's exactly what I'm trying to do, Sophia said, her eyes lighting up. Most people are so busy living their lives that they forget to really see them. I want to show people the beauty that's already there, right in front of them. Jake thought about his own life, his daily routine of work and sleep and distraction. When was the last time he'd really noticed anything beautiful? When had he stopped paying attention to the world around him? What about you? Sophia asked. What did you want to be when you were younger? Before you decided on the practical path? The question caught Jake off guard. He hadn't thought about his childhood dreams in years. I wanted to be a writer, he said, surprising himself by admitting it out loud. Travel writing, specifically. I had this idea that I'd visit remote places and tell stories about the people I met. That sounds amazing. What happened to that dream? Jake shrugged, feeling suddenly embarrassed. Life, I guess. College debt, job market, practical concerns. Writing doesn't exactly come with a steady paycheck. Neither does photography, Sophia pointed out gently. But somehow people manage to make it work. It's different, Jake said. You're talented. You have something special to offer. Sophia shook her head. Everyone has something special to offer. The difference is whether they're brave enough to share it with the world. Her words stung because they felt true. Jake realized he'd been using practical concerns as an excuse for years. The real issue wasn't money or security, it was fear. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of discovering that maybe he wasn't as good as he'd once believed. I haven't written anything creative in probably 5 years, he admitted. Why not? I don't know. I tell myself I'm too busy, too tired after work. But honestly, I think I'm scared that I'm not any good at it anymore. Sophia leaned back in her chair, studying him with those intelligent green eyes. You know what I learned when I started photography? The only way to get good at something is to be bad at it first. Everyone starts somewhere. But what if I've waited too long? What if I missed my chance? Jake, she said. And something about the way she said his name made him look directly at her. You're 29, not 99. You haven't missed anything. The only thing you'll miss is whatever you don't start today. The rain outside had softened to a gentle patter, but neither of them noticed. The cafe had grown quieter around them as other customers left, but they were completely absorbed in their conversation. I have notebooks full of story ideas at home, Jake found himself saying. Places I want to visit, people I want to interview. I just never do anything with them. What's stopping you from starting with something small? Maybe a local story, something right here in the city? Jake thought about it. There were interesting people everywhere if he bothered to look. The barista at this very cafe probably had stories worth telling. The elderly man who'd been reading the newspaper earlier. What was his history? I wouldn't even know where to begin, he said. The same place everyone begins, Sophia replied. With the first word. She made it sound so simple, but Jake knew it wasn't that easy. Still, talking to her made possibilities seem more real than they had in years. What about you? He asked, wanting to shift the focus away from his own fears. What's next for your photography? Sophia's expression became more animated. I'm working on a project about small-town America, places that are disappearing, communities that are changing. I want to document them before they're gone. That sounds like important work. I hope so. I think we're losing something valuable as everything becomes more connected but less personal. I want to capture what community really looks like before we forget." As she spoke about her passion, Jake could see why she'd been brave enough to leave her corporate job. She wasn't just taking pictures. She had a mission, a purpose that drove her forward even when things got difficult. "I admire your courage," Jake said. "Taking that leap, following your dreams even when it's scary." "It's not courage," Sophia replied. "It's just choosing which fear to listen to. The fear of failing or the fear of never trying." Those words settled into Jake's mind like seeds in fertile soil. He'd been listening to the wrong fear for years, letting it keep him safe but small. The barista approached their table apologetically. "Hey folks, I hate to interrupt, but we're closing in about 15 minutes. Jake looked around surprised. The cafe was empty except for them, and the warm lighting had been dimmed slightly. He checked his phone and was shocked to see it was nearly 10 p.m. They'd been talking for over 2 hours. "Time flies when you're having a real conversation," Sophia said, echoing his thoughts as they gathered their things. Jake felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and reluctance. This had been the most meaningful evening he'd had in months, maybe years. The idea of going back to his apartment and his routine felt suddenly unbearable. "This has been really wonderful," he said as they headed toward the door. "It has," Sophia agreed. "Thank you for letting a rain-soaked stranger share your table." They stepped outside together and Jake realized the evening was just beginning. Standing outside the cafe, Jake felt the cool night air hit his face. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets shiny and reflecting the streetlights like mirrors. Everything looked different somehow, cleaner and more alive. Sophia pulled her now dry cardigan back on and checked her phone. "Well, I definitely missed my train," she said with a laugh. "But honestly, I'm not even upset about it." "When's the next one?" Jake asked, though he found himself hoping she'd say it wasn't for a while. "There's one at midnight, but—" Sophia paused, looking up at the clear night sky that had emerged after the storm. "I'm thinking of driving instead. I have my car parked a few blocks away." Jake nodded, trying not to let his disappointment show. Of course she had other plans. This had been just a pleasant way to pass time during a rainstorm, nothing more. But then Sophia turned to him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Actually, I have a crazy idea. Want to hear it?" "Sure. I'm supposed to photograph a sunrise tomorrow for a project I'm working on. There's this amazing spot about 2 hours north of here, right on the coast. The light there at dawn is supposed to be incredible." Jake waited, sensing there was more to this story. "I was planning to drive up there tonight, sleep in my car, and be ready for the sunrise. I know it sounds completely spontaneous and maybe a little crazy, but—" She looked directly at him. "Want to come with me?" The question hit Jake like a physical force. His mind immediately started racing through all the logical reasons why this was impossible. "Tonight? Right now?" he asked. "Right now," Sophia confirmed. "I have blankets in my car, coffee in a thermos, and room for a passenger. We could be there by 1 a.m., catch some sleep, and wake up to what I'm told is one of the most beautiful sunrises on the East Coast." Jake's first instinct was to say no. He had work tomorrow. He needed to get home, get proper sleep in his own bed, follow his routine. Plus, going on a road trip with someone he'd just met a few hours ago was exactly the kind of impulsive decision he'd trained himself not to make. "I have work in the morning," he said automatically. Sophia nodded. "Right, of course. I should have thought of that." But she didn't look disappointed exactly. More like she'd expected that answer but had hoped for a different one. "When's the last time you did something completely spontaneous?" she asked gently. Jake thought about it. Really thought about it. The answer was embarrassing. "I honestly can't remember," he admitted. "When's the last time you felt truly excited about something?" That question was even harder to answer. Jake realized that excitement had been missing from his life for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like. "I don't know," he said quietly. Sophia stepped closer, but not in a way that felt pushy, more like someone offering support to a friend who was struggling with a difficult decision. "Look, I know we just met. I know this sounds crazy, but sometimes the best experiences in life come from saying yes to things that seem impossible." Jake looked at her standing there in the glow of the streetlight, her hair still slightly damp from the rain, her eyes bright with possibility. She was offering him an adventure, a break from the routine that had been slowly suffocating him. What if we miss the sunrise? What if the weather's bad? What if... He stopped himself, realizing he was doing exactly what he always did, finding problems before he even tried. What if it's amazing? Sophia countered. What if we see something beautiful? What if you go home tomorrow with a story worth telling instead of just another ordinary Friday? Jake felt something stirring inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. It might have been excitement or it might have been terror, probably both. I don't even have a change of clothes, he said, though even as he said it, he knew he was grasping for excuses. Neither do I. That's what makes it an adventure. Jake looked around at the familiar street. The same buildings he walked past every day. In a few hours he could be somewhere completely new, watching the sun come up over the ocean with someone who had already shown him more authenticity in one evening than he'd experienced in months. My boss will kill me if I'm late tomorrow, he said. Will he really? Sophia asked. Or will you just get a talking to and then life will go on exactly as it was? She had a point. Jake was a good employee. He'd never called in sick, never missed a deadline. One late morning wouldn't end his career. I'm not usually the kind of person who does things like this, he said. I know, Sophia replied. That's exactly why you should do it. Jake felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff. Behind him was everything safe and familiar and predictable. In front of him was the unknown, represented by this incredible woman who had walked into his life just a few hours ago and was now offering him a chance to step outside everything he thought he knew about himself. What if this is a terrible idea? He asked. Then tomorrow you'll have a great story about the time you made a terrible decision with a photographer you met in a coffee shop. Either way, it's better than wondering what might have happened. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from his upstairs neighbor asking if he wanted to split a pizza order. The mundane interruption felt like a message from his old life, trying to pull him back to safety. He looked at Sophia, who was waiting patiently for his answer. She wasn't pressuring him or trying to convince him. She'd made her offer and now the choice was his. If I say yes, Jake said slowly. Am I completely out of my mind? Probably, Sophia said with a grin. But the best adventures usually require a little bit of insanity. Jake thought about the conversation they'd just had, about dreams deferred and fears that kept you small. He thought about Sophia leaving her corporate job to follow her passion for photography. He thought about his notebooks full of story ideas that never became stories. Most of all, he thought about how alive he'd felt during the past few hours, more awake and present than he'd been in months. Okay, he said, the word coming out before he could stop it. Okay? Yes, let's do it. Let's go watch the sunrise. Sophia's face lit up with genuine joy. Really, you're sure? Jake felt a mix of excitement and terror coursing through him. No, I'm not sure at all. But I'm saying yes anyway. That's the best kind of yes, Sophia said. As they walked toward her car, Jake pulled out his phone and did something he'd never done before. He called his office voicemail and left a message saying he'd be late tomorrow morning due to a personal matter. It was a small act of rebellion, but it felt enormous. No regrets? Sophia asked as she unlocked her car. Jake looked back at the coffee shop where this whole evening had started, then at the woman who had somehow convinced him to throw caution to the wind. Ask me tomorrow, he said, getting into the passenger seat, but already he had a feeling that whatever happened next, he wouldn't regret choosing adventure over safety for once in his life. The drive to the coast was unlike anything Jake had experienced in years. Sophia's car was comfortable but clearly lived in, with camera equipment in the back seat and a collection of road trip snacks in the center console. She'd handed him control of the music, trusting him completely with the soundtrack to their adventure. They talked about everything and nothing as the city lights faded behind them. Sophia told him stories from her travels, about a small town in Oregon where everyone knew each other's coffee orders, and a diner in Kansas where the waitress had worked for 47 years and still remembered every regular customer's name. That's the kind of stuff I want to write about, Jake found himself saying. Real people, real stories. The things that matter but don't make headlines. So why don't you? Sophia asked, navigating a curve in the dark highway. I guess I never thought anyone would want to read it. Jake, trust me, in a world full of fake everything, people are desperate for something real. They just don't always know where to find it. As they drove deeper into the night, Jake felt something inside him relaxing, the constant tension he carried in his shoulders. the mental noise that usually filled his head. It was all starting to quiet down. Maybe it was the darkness or the rhythm of the road or just being away from everything familiar. "Can I ask you something?" Jake said as they passed through a sleeping town with just one streetlight. "Of course, Ween. Are you ever scared? About your life choices, I mean. About not having everything figured out?" Sophia was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "All the time," she said finally. "But I realized that being scared of the unknown felt better than being bored with the known." That hit Jake right in the chest. Being bored with the known, that's exactly what his life had become. They stopped for gas at a 24-hour station that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1980s while Sophia filled up the tank. Jake went inside to buy coffee and found himself actually talking to the night clerk, an older guy who told him he'd been working the overnight shift for 15 years. "You see everything working nights," the man said. "People at their most honest. 3 in the morning is when folks stop pretending." Walking back to the car, Jake thought about that. When did he stop being honest with himself? When did he start pretending that being comfortable was the same as being happy? The last hour of driving was mostly quiet, both of them getting sleepy as they climbed winding roads toward the coast. But it was a comfortable silence, the kind you can only have with someone when all the small talk has been exhausted, and you're left with just being present together. They reached the cliffs just as the sky was starting to show the faintest hint of light on the horizon. Sophia parked in a small lot overlooking the ocean, and they got out to stretch their legs. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the salt smell of the sea. Jake could hear waves crashing against rocks somewhere below them in the darkness. Above them, the last stars were still visible, but they were starting to fade as dawn approached. "We made it," Sophia said, pulling a blanket from her car. "Perfect timing." They found a spot on the grassy cliff edge and settled in to wait for sunrise. Sophia unpacked her camera equipment with practiced efficiency, checking settings and adjusting lenses in the dim light. Watching her work, Jake was struck by how completely in her element she seemed. This wasn't just a job for her, it was clearly a calling. She moved with purpose and confidence, someone who had found exactly what they were meant to be doing. "How do you know?" Jake asked suddenly. "Know what?" "How do you know when you've found the right thing?" "The thing you're supposed to be doing with your life." Sophia paused in her camera setup and looked at him thoughtfully. "I don't think there's just one right thing for most people. But I think you know you're on the right track when what you're doing feels like an extension of who you are, not something you have to force yourself to become." The horizon was getting lighter now, a soft glow spreading across the water. Sophia raised her camera and started taking test shots, adjusting for the changing light. "For me," she continued, "taking pictures doesn't feel like work. Even when it's hard, even when I'm tired or frustrated or broke, it still feels like the most natural thing in the world." Jake thought about his own work, how much effort it took just to get through each day, how much he had to psych himself up for meetings and deadlines and projects that felt meaningless. "I used to feel that way about writing," he said quietly. "Used to, in college and high school. I'd write stories and articles for hours without even noticing time passing. I'd get so caught up in finding the right words that I'd forget to eat." "What happened to that feeling?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, watching the sky continue to brighten. "I think I convinced myself it wasn't practical, that it was just a hobby, not something serious people did for a living. And now I spend 40 hours a week doing something that pays well but makes me feel empty inside." The first real light of dawn was starting to paint the sky in soft pinks and oranges. Sophia was taking pictures steadily now, moving around to capture different angles and compositions. "Jake," she said, without looking away from her camera, "what's the worst thing that could happen if you started writing again?" He'd never really thought about it that way. "I guess I might be bad at it, or no one would want to publish what I write. And then what? Would the world end?" "No," he admitted. "I'd just go back to what I'm doing now." "So really you have nothing to lose and everything to gain." The sun broke over the horizon just then, sending brilliant golden light across the water. Sophia was clicking away rapidly, capturing the moment from every angle she could think of. Jake had seen sunrises before, but never like this. Maybe it was the location, or maybe it was just that he was actually paying attention for once, but the beauty of it took his breath away. "Look at that," Sophia said softly. lowering her camera for just a moment to appreciate the scene with her own eyes instead of through a lens. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher and the colors shift from soft pastels to brilliant golds and blues. Jake felt something shifting inside him too, like the light was illuminating parts of himself that had been dark for too long. "Thank you," he said eventually. "For what?" "For this. For tonight, for asking me to come with you." He paused, trying to find the right words. "I feel more awake right now than I have in years." Sophia smiled, packing up her camera as the sunrise photography session came to an end. "That's what happens when you say yes to things that scare you a little bit." As they walked back to the car, Jake pulled out his phone. Instead of checking work emails like he normally would, he opened a note-taking app and started typing. "What are you doing?" Sophia asked. "Writing," Jake said, surprising himself. "About last night. About this morning. About meeting someone who reminded me that life is supposed to feel like an adventure, not a chore." Sophia grinned. "That sounds like a story worth telling." The drive back to the city was different from the drive out. They were both tired but energized at the same time. Jake found himself seeing everything with fresh eyes. The small towns they passed through, the people they saw at rest stops, the landscape that had been invisible in the darkness but was now revealed in full daylight. "So what happens now?" Jake asked as they got closer to home. "Now you go to work late, probably get a lecture from your boss, and pretend to be sorry about it," Sophia said with a laugh. "I mean, after that you decide who you want to be. The person who plays it safe or the person who chases sunrises." When Sophia dropped him off at his apartment building, Jake felt like he was returning from a much longer journey than one night. Everything looked the same, but he knew something fundamental had changed. "Will I see you again?" he asked. "I'm leaving town this afternoon," she said. "But Jake, you don't need me to keep having adventures. You just needed to remember that you're allowed to have them." She was right. As Jake watched her drive away, he realized that Sophia hadn't just given him one amazing night. She'd given him permission to start living the life he actually wanted instead of the life he thought he was supposed to have. That afternoon, instead of going back to his usual routine, Jake sat down at his computer and started writing. Really writing, for the first time in years. He wrote about the coffee shop, about meeting someone who changed his perspective in a single evening, about discovering that the most important adventures often begin with the smallest decisions to step outside your comfort zone. Months later, when that story was published in a travel magazine, his first published piece in over 5 years, Jake would think about that rainy Thursday evening when everything changed. Sophia had appeared out of nowhere, challenged everything he thought he knew about himself, and then disappeared just as suddenly. But the impact remained. Jake had learned that sometimes the people who change our lives aren't meant to stay forever. Sometimes they're just meant to wake us up, to remind us who we really are underneath all the safe choices and practical decisions. And sometimes, that's exactly what we need.